First, I want to thank Lee Rusniak for organising this conference and Wits University for being our host. It's a delight to be back in South Africa. It's an honour to be among the LCT community again. It really is. And today I'm going to discuss one reason why what we do matters. I'm not going to talk in a broad-brushed way for most of this talk, nor will I give a list of examples of our impact. Over the next 4 days you're going to hear many fantastic papers in which LCT scholars and educators and activists show how they're understanding and changing the world for the better. Instead, I'll just do what LCT allows us to do. I'll analyse real-world, naturally occurring data in detail, and I'll illustrate one thing we do that matters, which is to make explicit what Bourdieu called the rules of the game. And I'll do that in three main parts. First, I'll briefly give a little context as to why I'm discussing this issue, and then in the main part of my talk, I'll analyse two classrooms and a comedy sketch, and I'll use the relatively new concepts of autonomy codes, and I'll show what happens when you make the rules of the game clear, and what happens when you don't. And then lastly, I'll briefly return to how LCT allows us to do exactly that, which is to make explicit the rules of the game and why it matters that we do. I'll start then with why we're here. So as a community, LCT is international, it's multidisciplinary. LCT first emerged in the southern hemisphere, this is a map of the world, in Australia and South Africa, but it's growing in Latin America and China. Can you see that? I shall turn. Is that too low? There you go. So it's emerged in Australia and South Africa, it's growing in Latin America and China and the Nordic countries and UK and the USA, and in fact many more places that I can actually find and add on the map. And similarly, LCT may have cut its teeth in studies of education, but as you'll hear this week, not only does that work reach across the disciplinary map, but also there are people studying many other fields, such as law. So this conference is an opportunity for us to come together as a community. But it's more than that, really. It's most of the time we're writing papers or we're giving talks to audiences who know nothing about LCTs. So this is a chance for us to meet with others who speak the same language, who have the same trained gaze. Here we don't have to start from scratch. And we can listen to others using similar concepts to ourselves, often in different ways, or to look at different issues. So it is an inclusive occasion. But to others, LCT itself can seem exclusionary. And from there, it's fairly easy to then slide into thinking of it as conservative, as scientistic or technicist, or positivist or northern and so on. Legitimation code theory is a fairly scary sounding name. It's multisyllabic, it's technical sounding, and it doesn't have the sort of positive axiological charge such as critical LCT, or powerful LCT, or cuddly LCT. It also uses planes and profiles, which can look suspiciously technical. And its framework comprises precisely defined concepts that are clearly related to empirical reference. And the concepts aren't waffly or metaphorical, they mean something definite and specific, and they can be used to examine real-world, naturally occurring data in great detail. Now, the price of this explanatory power that gives us is that it takes time and effort to learn what they mean and how to put them to work. LCT is not always easy or immediately obvious. It's taking me, for example, years to learn how autonomy codes work. Now, those attributes can be viewed negatively. Why? Because, well, one reason because LCT doesn't really fit particularly well or easily into the usual way of categorizing and viewing theories, which reflects what I've previously called the big dichotomy. What's the big dichotomy? It embodies a mindset that's a disaster for progress in ideas, a disaster for making the world a better place. It lies behind so many debates that are stuck, like intellectual trench warfare. It's behind ideas and policies that deny people access to new ways of thinking and opportunities to transform their own lives. What is it? Well, those who were at previous LCT conferences, this is becoming a theme for me, would have seen me use this painting. It's the School of Athens. It's painted by Raphael in the early 16th century, and it includes every major figure of ancient Greek culture. And I argued previously that it portrays two great constellations of ideas. So in the middle you've got Plato and Aristotle demonstrating their differences. Plato's on the left, and he's arguing, for example, for more of an abstract, deductive, top-down account of the world. And you've got Aristotle on the right saying we need to start from the facts on the ground. And everyone in the painting is actually associated in some way or another, in a Renaissance understanding anyway, with one or other of those positions. So they're arranged in two big groups. So we've got these two big binary constellations of practices and beliefs. And this painting really is a wonderful exemplar of the big dichotomy that has assailed a lot of particularly Western thinking, as it's called, over the centuries. Ideas have been added, it's evolved, they've been added, they've been removed, they've been shifted. But thousands of years later, we still, and hundreds of years after this painting, we still regularly face two big constellations. On the one side, a cold, abstract, reductionist, scientistic constellation. On the other side, a more warm and grounded and experiential and humanistic one, which are often then politically charged. One is conservative and northern and western and allied with the dominant, and the other is progressive and southern and allied with the dominated. And we can add many, many more stances to that list. But what's more important is the sort of mindset that this embodies, this big dichotomy. And that's first that it's an either-or way of thinking. It demands you choose one or other of the constellations and only one. Second, it's a sort of all-or-nothing way of thinking. If you like one thing from a constellation, you're associated with all the others in that constellation, whether you agree with them or not. And third, it's universalizing. Whatever you've chosen is the answer to everything, whatever the question. So the big dichotomy demands you sort of pick a constellation, you sign up for everything in it, and then you're on that side no matter what the issue. And that dominates, that's a crude picture of it, but it dominates the intellectual practices. It's the big lobotomy, as far as I'm concerned. Now LCT is a danger to this dominant mindset because it denies the big dichotomy, it defies its either-or way of thinking, and it dissolves the oppositions. Just like Mary Douglas described Basil Bernstein, it could be seen as a fearsome, scaly monster cutting across the tiny categories. As I've said before, the LCT community are a bunch of benevolent misfits. As we know, LCT embraces knowledge and knows. It ranges between the abstract and the concrete. It values both the academic and the everyday, both theoretical and experiential. It involves quantitative and qualitative knowledge, methods, and so on. But what makes LCT truly dangerous is that it reveals the rules of the game. It shows the basis of success in social activities, and it shows that these are rarely what either of those constellations say should be the case. For example, LCT work on making semantic waves moves between abstract and concrete knowledge and weaves them together. Or work on taking autonomy tours that brings together academic and everyday forms of knowledge or theory or experience and integrates them. And what's worse, by making those rules of the game explicit, LCT scholars and educators are empowering people to change the rules of the game if they wish to. Not only because it's a lot easier to change something if you know it's there, but also by teaching LCT to others who can use it themselves to create their own rules, their own game. And all of that's dangerous to advocates of both constellations because both sides have vested interests in keeping the dichotomy. So doing what we do could lead to a backlash from both sides, and that's why for the rest of this talk I'm going to focus on why making explicit the rules of the game is so important, why it matters. And I'll do that on two levels. I'm going to use LCT concepts to make explicit what's going on in a couple of classrooms. And in so doing, I'm going to show that a teacher who makes explicit the rules of her game sets up her students to succeed, while another teacher who doesn't do that sets up his students to struggle. Now before I do that, I have to introduce a couple of sets of concepts, just in case anyone doesn't know them, in case people aren't familiar with them. The first is very simple, and it refers to the focus of practices. In LCT, we distinguish between the focus and the basis. Focus refers to what's being written about or spoken about or done. Basis refers to the principles underlying practice, how it's being legitimated. Legitimation codes are all about basis, not focus. It's the legitimation, it's in the name. So legitimation is crucial for LCT. But I have found it useful to sometimes distinguish the different things that are being discussed, for example, in classrooms. Specifically here, I'm going to find it useful to distinguish between content focus, when content knowledge is being discussed, such as the solar system in science, or directional focus, when teachers or students are discussing how to do something, such as what to do with watching a video or conducting an experiment, and behavioural focus, when they're discussing behaviour. These are called my classroom data. For other objects of study, you might need different distinctions. And I should add, though, that the point is not to list everything that people can have as a focus. That's infinite. It's just what's useful for your research. And here I'm going to find it useful to distinguish between content focus and directional focus. And you'll see why. To analyse the basis of these classroom practices I'm going to discuss, I'm going to use autonomy codes. For several years, we fundamentally reworked these concepts. We finally released our first paper on them last year, available for free from the LCT website. We've barely scratched the surface of what these concepts can do, so they're very exciting to me at least. And autonomy begins, and I apologise for everyone who went to the workshop yesterday, you can hear it again. Autonomy begins from the simple premise that a set of practices is made up of constituents or parts, and that those constituents are related together in various ways. Constituents could be actors or ideas, it could be machine parts or sound or body movement. How they're related together could be explicit rules, it could be tacit ways of working that are never said, many things. And autonomy explores the issue of insulation, or how strongly bounded a set of practices is from other practices. And to do that, we ask, how insulated are the constituents, and how insulated are the ways those constituents are related together? And that gives us our two principles that make autonomy codes. Positional autonomy refers to the strength of boundaries between constituents within a contextual category and those positioned somewhere else. So, for example, if my actions effectively say there should be stronger boundaries between what's happening here and what's happening somewhere else, that's stronger positional autonomy. Relational autonomy is how those constituents are related together. So, for example, if my actions said there should be stronger boundaries between how we do things with what's here and how they're done elsewhere, that would be stronger relational autonomy. Or put more simply, we can think of them as referring to content, positional autonomy as being about content, and relational autonomy being about boundaries around purpose. So we're asking questions about how insulated or how strongly bounded are the content and the purpose of the practices. And the boundaries around each of those can be characterized by many strengths, so we can describe a continuum of strengths of positional autonomy and a continuum of strengths of relational autonomy. And we have four main autonomy codes. I'll just briefly run through these rather abstractly, and then we'll get to an awful lot of data, so don't worry, we'll be coming down from the clouds. I'll just run through these quickly. Sovereign codes are where positional autonomy and relational autonomy are both strong, so strongly insulated positions, and inward-looking or autonomous principles. What's valued is content from inside the context or category, strong positional autonomy, that acts in accordance with its distinctive ways of working or purposes, strong relational autonomy. Exotic codes are the opposite. They draw on content from somewhere else. Weaker positional autonomy, they put those practices to some other purpose. Weaker relational autonomy. Introjected codes are where the practices come from outside, and they turn to a purpose that comes from inside. They bring in ideas or practices from somewhere else, they use them for their own purposes. And lastly, projected codes are the other way around. Practices come from inside, and they're used for purposes that come from somewhere else. And there'll be examples of at least three of these codes repeatedly through the rest of the talk. Now, like all LCT codes, this is in four boxes. It's a topology with an O, so there are infinite positions on the plane. I could analyze every, textbook in a discipline or lesson in a school or something. and code every single one of those, you see a whole bunch of codes going on. They're not 4 boxes. And I could do that for some other textbook or some other lesson or some other day, and then compare this range of different scattergraph positions on the plane. Or another thing we can do with the plane is to trace pathways over time. For example, this is an autonomy tour. It's not the only kind you can get. An autonomy tour is simply something that starts from one code, goes somewhere else, and ends up back at its original code. For example, this is the shortest sort of autonomy tour. It's called a return trip. You go from one to another and then back again. Return trips are going to be my main focus today. Okay, finally, there are infinite places on the plane, so how do we decide where to put data? As you know, LCT concepts can be used to analyze real-world data in detail. I have defined them rather abstractly because they can be used to analyze many things, so we need to say how they look here. These concepts are not locked onto classroom practice. I'm going to say how they look in our classrooms using a translation device. And we start with what's stronger or weaker. And that depends upon what's called the target. Target content for positional autonomy or target purpose for relational autonomy. A target is what makes a contextual category distinctive. It makes this a keynote lecture, not, say, a political speech or a birthday party. We don't impose a definition of that, because we know that what is a lecture or what is science or whatever it might be is socially constructed, it's very contextual, it's subject to contestation, it will change. So we don't try and find a universal definition, we find out how it's constructed by the actors involved. The research I'm going to discuss, we studied classroom practice in secondary schools in New South Wales and Australia. We analysed what the teachers aim to do using interviews and course materials, and we identified what they saw as their target in the lessons we studied. And that helped us figure out how to code what they were doing. Our teachers identified their target as the New South Wales Stage 4 syllabus for science, which basically is 7 to 10. They described their target content as this. That's what the top content they were going for. So positional autonomy is stronger whenever they or their students discuss content from that syllabus, and it's weaker when they discuss anything else. And they described their target purpose as teaching that content. So relational autonomy is stronger whenever whatever they're talking about is used to discuss, used to teach that syllabus. It doesn't have to be content from the syllabus, it might be something else. But when it's used for teaching the syllabus, that's stronger relational autonomy. And it's weaker when they're using whatever they're talking about for some other purpose. And that gives us our first simple level, a stronger or weaker. But we can be more delicate, we can be less crude by distinguishing within the target, between the core, which is what's essential, and for the teachers we looked at, it was the specific unit of study that they were teaching, which in this case is going to be Earth in space. And anything else that wasn't absolutely essential that was inside their target is ancillary, which here is other topics, other units within their target, such as the chemical world. And in terms of non-target, it's not some sort of homogeneous blob. It can be all sorts of different things, some nearer or further away from their target. So we can distinguish between associated, which is closer to the target. In this case, other educational knowledge is how they thought of it, including other stages of education or other subject areas, as well as pedagogic directions, which I'll come back to. And we can grab things like open your workbooks. And we can describe unassociated that's further away, and for these teachers, it was knowledge from outside education. Everyday knowledge, often it's called. Now remember, I hate pluses and minuses, but it's an inheritance. Pluses and minuses have absolutely nothing to do with value or quality. They're just notation for strength of boundaries. So that's our basic translation device for the lessons I'm going to analyze. The lessons are alike in every way, almost, in the sense that they're the same year of school, the same subject, the same unit of study, the same curriculum content points, but as I'll show, differences in how they teach means that one teacher sets her students up to succeed by making explicit rules of her game, and the other teacher leaves his students in the dark about what he wants them to learn. I should first make clear that I couldn't have done everything that follows without collaborating and working very closely with Sarah Howard. She identified these examples and worked with me creating the translation device and doing the first version of these analyses. Okay, so as I just ran through, the target for these both teachers was the New South Wales Stage 4 Science syllabus. Their core target, their unit was Earth and Space. Their inner core target, you can distinguish even further, I didn't go into that third level of the translation device. The inner core target was what they were teaching in this lesson. They wanted to get to why the Earth has seasons. I'm going to begin by briefly showing you a very brief video of the first example to give you a sense of this classroom.
Looking at this picture now, I want you to tell me some other things that you may see we haven't really talked about, but they're shown in the image. All right, what do you think, Liam?
What about ellipses?
Good. So it's not really shown in this image, but we know that these orbits are not circular, they're elliptical. Okay, and if you remember, ellipses is kind of like an oval shape. Okay, good. All right, Anthony.
Comets?
Yes, we haven't really talked about comets. Comets, we think, come from the Kuiper belt. They get pushed off their orbit because of the other things crashing into one another, and then they shoot off throughout our solar system and then possibly out of our solar system to other places as well. Ryan.
Well, the asteroid belts.
Yep, we didn't talk about those. Yep, good. Anybody else see anything else?
Mine's a question.
Yep.
Are the orbits that we go on, are they perfectly circular?
No, they're elliptical.
Oh, so
Yep.
I thought you meant the actual planet.
No, oh yes, but also the planets can be not perfectly spherical. Does anyone know about the Earth, the shape of the Earth?
Yeah, it's like slightly flatter at the poles.
It's slightly flatter at the poles and slightly more pointy rounded at the equator, which is the sort of the middle part of the Earth. Good.
Okay, that's just a taste. I'm going to be analysing a lot more than that. I'm going to cover the first 10 minutes of per lesson. Be warned, this is detailed real-world data, and it will take me a while. But overall, it's simple. I'm going to argue the teacher switches between orienting her students to her target knowledge and eliciting that target knowledge from her students. And during both of these, she takes her class on repeated return trips between two codes, trips that move closer and closer and closer to the heart of her target. And what she does may seem obvious to you as we go through, but my second example is going to show how untrue that is. Okay, so we begin at the start of the lesson, and the teacher says, all right, has everyone got their workbooks out? Good, we're going to be looking at Earth and Space today. Has everyone written the heading Earth and Space? So this is directional focus. She's telling them what to do. And that's easy to code wrongly, by the way. Directions to students are not themselves part of her target content. They're not what she wants the students to learn. You won't find getting workbooks out in the science syllabus. So they're weaker positional autonomy. So pedagogic directions like this could be anywhere on the bottom half of the plane. They could be exotic or interjected. Which code depends upon whether the directions are aimed at her target purpose or not. In this case they are. They're turned to her target purpose of teaching and learning the syllabus. Indeed, they're aimed at her core target of teaching about Earth and Space. Very strong relational autonomy, so over on the far right there. So she briefly starts in an introjected code, and she continues. Okay, in our last few lessons we've been talking about models of the solar system. I found one here for us to look at. There's the sun, which we know is in the centre, but for ease of this diagram I've just shown you one section. And we know that all of the planets don't really line up like this. Occasionally they will, but again, for the ease of the diagram, we're going to put them all together like that. So we know that there's 8 planets. Or little Pluto can be considered an exoplanet. So she's using a simplified image of the solar system where sizes and spacing and arranging are simplified. And she's moved quickly into content focus, into a recount, using that image as a source of shared engagement. She's discussing her core target content for her core target purpose. She's shifted deep inside her sovereign code. And she continues there, pointing out things they know or don't know in the image. There's also a thing in here which we didn't really talk about, called the asteroid belt, okay? And there's another one as well on the outside of the solar system, called the Kuiper belt. What's the planets as a student? No, Make is the biggest thing in the Kuiper belt, and Ceres is the biggest thing in the asteroid belt. Now the key thing to note so far is that she repeatedly keeps saying, we know, or we haven't talked about. She's orienting them to the sort of target content she's interested in. And that target content is piling up fast. We've already heard all these technical terms. So she begins with an orienting phase that directs them to the target content. Now, as I said, this is authentic real-world data. I'm not cherry-picking, so I'm telling you everything that happens. There's 15 seconds now of exotic code when a student asks what the date is, and she says it's 7/11. And then there's a discussion about the fact that you can get free drinks from the shop, 7-Eleven on this day. And I mention that because the teacher then does what we call a hard reset. She says, all right, here is our model of the solar system. She resets them hard reset inside the sovereign code. And she asks them what the lines on the image mean. So she shifts from focusing on content in blue to directions in red that are turned to her target purpose. So we're briefly back in an introjected code. And the question elicits content from a student who says, it's the orbit of the sun and the lines that they orbit on. And the teacher elaborates on that. Yeah, good. All of these planets are orbiting around the sun, and these lines kind of indicate where these orbits are. So again, we're back in the sovereign code. We're focused on target content, core target content. And this return trip between an introjected code and a sovereign code is repeated over and over again. The teacher says, looking at this picture now, I want you to tell me some other things that you may see. What about ellipses? Well, she elaborates on that response, including, we know that we're involved. And that's followed by another asking students directly, asking another student directly a question, eliciting an answer or comments, and highlighting that we didn't really talk about them, and then elaborating on the answer. After several more rounds like this, she aims them directly at an issue she wants to discuss with directions. So look carefully at the image. What do you notice about the part of Jupiter that's facing the sun and the part of Jupiter that's not facing the sun? A student answers about light and dark, and the teacher elaborates to day and night, which is a curriculum content point in this unit. So the teacher's taking the student class on a series of return trips between an introjected code when she's giving them directions and asking them questions, and a sovereign code of student answers and her elaborations on those answers. In short, her directions are always pointing towards her core target content, the kind of knowledge content that she's interested in. And where the first phase of orienting to the target involved her recounting that content, here she's been eliciting that content from the students, that knowledge from the students. Now, having reached the topic of night and day, she repeats those two activities. She orients the students to the target, and she elicits the target knowledge from them. She does a hard reset, stopping the Q&A. Okay, hands down. And then she makes it clear that what we're going to be talking about now over the next few lessons is night and day, and she also makes it clear that it involves the tilt of the Earth. This is directional focus. Here is an introjected code. And then she does a sort of recount and a kind of pre-count, so both focused on content, both firmly inside the sovereign code. She begins, this is the slide she puts up there for words. Obviously she doesn't put a LCT plain up. She says, so far we know about, this is what she says, so far we know about Earth's position in the solar system. We know about Earth's size compared to other planets compared to the Sun, and we know about its orbit around the Sun. So we're back in sovereign code content. She continues with this slide and says, okay, this is what we're going to learn about over the next couple of lessons. We're going to learn about the shape of the Earth. We're going to learn about the axis of the Earth. We're going to learn about the Moon. And we're going to learn about eclipses. Next, having oriented the students, she aims them directly at the center of her target and elicits knowledge from them. She puts up this image. And she says, here is the Earth. We know that the Earth is round, and mostly when you look at it, you see a round picture. Here we kind of cut it down one side and flattened it out so you can see it. There's a line going through the middle. So we're back in sovereign code focusing on content, and then she elicits knowledge from the students in a rapid-fire series of return trips. What does the line represent? The equator. What do we call the parts, the top and the bottom? The poles. What are the top and bottom halves called? Hemispheres. And moving closer and closer to her goal, she says, I want you to think now, looking at this map, what could you tell me about weather using the map, using the words we just talked about? And there's a series of questions and answers until she sums up that it's colder at the poles and hotter at the equator and states, that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to do an experiment to investigate it. And then she explains the experiment, which happens to use a lamp and a wooden block to explore how the angle of the sunlight affects temperature. They do that for the remaining 50 minutes of the lesson. Then in the second lesson, the students build on their findings to understand how the angle of sunlight affects temperature on Earth. And that becomes a key factor to which the teacher adds other factors that together cause seasons on Earth. In other words, in the first 10 minutes of lesson time that I've just analysed, she set them up for a cornerstone of the entire unit. They're aimed at her target. So in conceptual terms, while starting this unit, first, relational autonomy was always strong. She's always keeping them on the far right-hand side of the plane. Positional autonomy shifts, and changes between weaker when she's giving directions, and stronger when she's discussing content that are student answers or her elaborations on those answers. And third, we've seen constant return trips between a sovereign code and an interjected code, or an interjected and a sovereign, I should say. What does that mean? Well, first, in this case, it means there's rarely a moment where classroom practice is not turned to the teacher's target purpose of learning Earth and space. Second, it means that her target content is clear. Students know what they're supposed to be learning right now, in this lesson, in the next few lessons, and through this unit. And she repeatedly makes clear what we know, what we're going to learn. And third, the return trips are how she moves the students to the bullseye of her target. Her sovereign code discussion of content orients the students to her target knowledge, and her interjected code directions elicit that target knowledge from her students. And she uses return trips to reach that bullseye. I kept the planes relatively simple, but we can actually trace a progressive movement closer and closer to what she wants them to do right now. She moved them from discussing Earth and space, which is the whole unit, through night and day and Earth seasons, which are curriculum content points of this unit, to reach the experiment that is today's lesson. And each time she builds on previous moves to reach her bullseye. Now let's be clear, really clear. I'm not saying the stronger the positional autonomy, the better. I'm discussing only the start of the unit and how she reaches its first main activity. There are many times when teachers need to weaken positional autonomy. They need to reach out to non-target content. So I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that her target content is clear and her target purpose is clear. In other words, those two aspects of her rules of the game are explicit. Now, of course, you could argue her targets are wrong. You could argue she should be teaching something else. You could, here, I'm not judging that. I'm not judging what this teacher should or shouldn't be teaching. My point is simply that given this is her target, she makes it explicit. And that's one reason why the experiment that follows goes really smoothly. The students go on to graph their results really well, and so on. The lessons really work. The students do really, really well. She sets them up to succeed at her game. Now the question this raises is what happens if you don't make the rules of the game explicit? I'm very glad you asked me. To my second example. Different school, but exactly the same in every other way. Year 7, same target, so the same core target unit, same inner core target for this lesson. My first example was the first 10 minutes of the lesson, which I did at high speed and was a lot. This is the first 45 minutes, but I'm going to be quick. I won't tell you what's coming so you can enjoy the horror. And I won't show a video because that wouldn't be fair. Okay, the lesson begins with the teacher saying to the whole class, now we're studying our new topic, which is the Earth in space. After your title page, put this heading, the Earth in space. What is my current understanding? I'm going to show you some images, and we're going to see what you currently know about various things to do with the Earth seasons and things like that. So his focus is directional, and it's turned to the purpose of teaching about Earth in space. It's an interjected code, like before. And then the teacher shows the students 3 images, and they have to answer questions about each. The first image is this. This is taken from our video. You can see the heads of students. You can see he's turned off the main lights. The students are sitting in the dark. And the images of the Earth is half in light and half in dark. And he asks them to describe what you think is happening in that picture. And after a couple of minutes of them trying to think of something to write, he writes down as a question on the whiteboard. And after a couple of more minutes of class silence, he writes another question down and says, now there's a second part. The second one will require a little bit more thought. What happens to the outer daylight at a particular location throughout the year? So he's continuing his directional focus, and it's still an interjected code where the purpose is in his target, and it's explicit, similar to the previous teacher. But with the previous teacher started in that code and then shifted to a sovereign code and recounted some ideas to orient the students to her target content, this teacher doesn't. He leaves what he's talking about, what he's asking for, entirely open. He just says, I just want you to get down some thoughts. It doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. We just want to see what you already know so we don't end up covering things that you already know about. The numbers at the end will be the lesson time. We're already over 11 minutes in. And he soon repeats that. You can write down any of your thoughts on this, okay? Don't worry whether you think, oh, I might be wrong. Let's just see what you understand at the moment. So his purpose is clear, but what kind of content is he after? What does he mean by your thoughts or your current understanding? He says anything, any of your thoughts. That's what he says, but as we're going to see, he has very specific target content in mind, and he doesn't make it explicit to his students. I'll show you that as we go. A student immediately responds to this, "Sir, I've got no thoughts." which is content, so it's in blue, but it's not in his target content and not serving his target purpose. The teacher ignores that. While the students are trying to have thoughts, he wanders around the room, and some ask him what kind of knowledge he's after. So, for example, that personal, or they're asking for directions. The teacher does not explicitly elicit personal experience or knowledge from outside his syllabus target. Doing so could be really valuable. In the paper, Taking Autonomy Choice, we analyse teachers bringing in ideas from personal experience very, very successfully. This teacher doesn't do that. He says again, okay, just write down your thoughts. Don't worry whether you think it might be wrong, just let's see what you already know. Another 3 minutes later, another student says, "Sir, I've got no thoughts." And then we get a quick series of return trips between these codes. The teacher replies, "You must have one thought. What are we looking at? What's that an image of, do you think? Earth. Yep, showing. What's it showing? Half night, half day? Yep, so that's a thought, so you can put that down." So we're 17 minutes in and we've reached our first positive focus on content, and some orienting to what he means by a thought, but it's quietly spoken, it's one student only, it's not elaborated or connected to what we know or what we're going to learn. It's simply saying effectively describe what you see. And then we're on to the second image. Yeah, they're still sitting in the dark, literally as well as metaphorically. The image is not technical, it's a tree in 4 seasons. Again, he doesn't orient students to what they might have thoughts about. He says, okay, so there's an image of somewhere that looks like it's in the Northern Hemisphere, all right? It's the same location throughout the year, just in case that's not clear. So the second image, explain. He writes the question on the whiteboard, explain your current understanding of the courses of seasons. And he says that he explains that that's asking for an explanation. And then he says, now again, if you're not sure, just write down any thoughts that you might have. So again, we're starting in an interjected code, and as it goes around the room, we again hear students responding negatively, creating return trips between interjected codes and exotic codes. What if I don't have any? What if you don't have thoughts? Says one student. Okay, don't worry too much, because we're going to be going through this. I couldn't think of anything, says. And his mantra that any thought is worth putting down, and why. So he's repeatedly making the immediate purpose clear, but it's disconnected from any content. And then we come to the last image. I'll spare you the details, you've suffered enough. In short, the same thing happens, and we hear the same sorts of directions. So after 32 minutes, he then elicits student answers. In the first example, the teacher connected their ideas to what we know and what we're going to learn. This teacher does not. He asks, the first image, what was that showing? Day and night? That's a curriculum content point. But it's not elaborated on or connected to other ideas. Instead, there's some discussion about where the moon might be in this photograph. And he sums up, the teacher sums up, says, so it's an image showing half of the earth in light, half of the earth in dark. So we could say it's almost like they've shifted into his target content. And it's worth noting again that double plus and pluses are not evaluation of quality or complexity. This is very low level content. We could say that, but we could also make a case that without any elaboration or connection to any other ideas, it's not in his target content at all, it's just describing the photograph. So for many students it might be over here. They don't know. Similarly asked the second question, who came up with the description of what happens at a particular place on Earth during the year in terms of daylight? A student suggests in Sydney, like throughout the year, parts of the year the daylight is shorter and other parts it's longer. That does seem to be eliciting target content. But without a second's pause, another student says, because of daylight savings. Which is not target content, and he doesn't correct that. After we tried several more times to get an answer, the teacher sums up with, it's the amount of daylight that we have. Again, not connected to other ideas, whether scientific or personal, past or future. He asked the third question, does anybody have an explanation of what causes seasons? One student thinks it's about the distance between the moon and the earth. Another suggests it's because the Earth rotates. They're both wrong, but this, remember, is what he asked for. He wanted their understanding. But it doesn't do anything with it. He just says those answers are more to do with tides and more to do with day and night and day, and he keeps asking for answers. So despite his repeated mantra that any thought will do, he starts to show that he does have specific target content in mind that he's trying to get them to say, but he hasn't made that explicit to them. And this becomes even more clear at this point, because there's a silence from the students, so he tries to reach his hidden target content in a different way. He does the return trips on his own. He suggests ideas, and then he claims he saw or heard a student say it. So, for example, orbiting around the sun. I'm sure I saw someone mention that. Somebody mentioned something about the way the Earth faces. 10 seconds of silence. Someone mentioned to me a word beginning with T. What's the Earth doing there? It's tilting, isn't it? Somebody wrote down and said to me that the seasons have something to do with the tilt of the Earth, okay? And that's correct. So nobody said anything like that, and we have microphones everywhere. Sarah is the queen of capturing classroom data. That was definitely not said. So he's doing some return trips, the same return trips as the first teacher, but those were between an interjected code of her questions and a sovereign code of student answers and her elaborations. And here the teacher's doing both questions and answering them without elaboration. So there's no big finish here in this one. That's part of the story, really. The last question was about eclipses from one, and we get things from one student. We had a moon that was orange, and a discussion of the sun and the moon coming together, and a confused discussion about what's a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse. Little target content, and that's 45 minutes of lesson time. So in theoretical terms, position autonomy was almost always weak. His directions do not orient the students to his target content, and their responses rarely involve that content. Secondly, relational autonomy is only stronger for his directions, not for most student responses. When they give non-target content, he doesn't turn that to purpose, he ignores it mostly. And third, we saw return trips between interjected code, directions, and exotic codes of having no thoughts, except for when he briefly answered his own questions. So what does that mean? Well, as I've repeatedly said, his target purpose is explicit, but he doesn't orient the students to his target content. Despite what he says, he doesn't just want any thoughts. He doesn't just want to build on anything. He doesn't encourage personal experiences when the student suggests that. He wants to elicit specific target content from his students, and that becomes obvious when he pretends that they've given it to him. So he does not make the rules of his game clear. And you can guess what the rest of the unit's like. The students don't know what's going on, the ideas don't build and connect, they're mostly lost, and the lessons drift. So the first teacher directed her students further and further into her target so that they knew where they were in the unit, in the content points and in the lesson. She set up her students to succeed at her game. This teacher gave them no sense of what his target content might be, so he set him up to struggle, if not to fail. Okay? You following so far? Okay, let's get out of classrooms and academic knowledge. Does anybody not know of the TV series Game of Thrones? Well, it's violent, dark, and full of terrors. And people tell each other winter is coming as a warning. So we're going to watch someone who's going to struggle, and it bloody well has, isn't it? So we're going to watch someone struggling to understand the rules of the game. This goes on for a few minutes, but since it's so funny, I think you quite mind.
Thank you all so much for coming over.
Of course, this is so nice.
You know, I actually walked here all the way from Brooklyn because it's so beautiful today.
Oh, yeah, New York is gorgeous in the spring.
Spring is officially sprung.
Winter is coming.
Who's your new friend again, Seth?
This is John, and John actually think winter is over and we're headed into spring now.
Winter is coming.
Okay.
The snow will fall 100 feet deep. The ice wind will howl out the north, and the sun hides its face for years, and little children will all be born and die in the darkness.
So much for global warming, huh?
You won't be laughing when the White Walkers rip you limb from limb, and packs of pale spiders as big as hounds feast on your remains.
So how does everybody like the wine?
Oh, it's great. Where's it from?
It's from a place in Napa called Schramsberg Valley.
You know, my mom is actually from Napa.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I never knew my mother.
Sorry to hear that, John.
I'm a bastard.
Okay, but you don't have to call yourself that, though.
I'm the bastard son of Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell, head of the Stark family, Warden of the North.
Well, he sounds like an impressive guy. Do you and your father keep in touch?
His head was chopped off.
You're always talking about how you don't have any friends, and this is why.
I'm just making small talk.
No, none of that is small talk. Small talk is, what do you do for a living? Do you have any siblings?
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
All right.
So, lots. Do you have any siblings?
One brother lives in Cleveland. You?
My brother was stabbed to death at his own wedding. My bad. My bad. I knew it as soon as I said it.
Okay. Are you still in Brooklyn, Michelle?
Oh, no, I am. I moved to the city.
We just moved to the city too, and let me tell you, it was the right decision.
The wall.
What's that, John?
That's where I live. It's 400 leagues north of King's Landing.
So, like Staten Island?
No, it's no island, sir. It's a cold, dark place, 700 feet high and 300 miles wide, made of nothing but pure ice, with conditions so harsh and cold it'll make your little prick fall off. The Brussels sprouts are amazing. What's this, pancetta?
It is.
Seth, where did you two say you met again?
CrossFit.
The high-intensity interval training keeps me in shape for fighting wildlings, while the increased muscle mass helps me defend the Seven Kingdoms against 55-foot giants.
And I just, want to look good for TV.
I like your friend, Seb. He's so interesting.
Your red hair reminds me of my first love, Egret.
Ooh, Egret. Tell me about Egret.
She shot me with 3 arrows in the chest and then the child murdered her in cold blood. Was it the child murder stuff?
Yes.
I'd like to apologise for the way I've been acting. Work has been very stressful.
Hi.
It's a complicated story.
We've got time.
Okay. Well, it all started when Robert Baratheon, king of the Seven Kingdoms, was announced the vacancy for the throne. So,
Wow.
That should be a series of books.
I think it'd make a better TV show.
So, wait, who do you think your mother really is?
Ah, well, I thought about it a lot, and I'm 100% certain.
Let's play charades!
Yeah!
Direwolf. Three-eyed raven. Incest!
Time.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
What was it then?
You Got Mail.
I love that movie.
Me too.
Really?
Yeah.
Right, so when analysing autonomy, we need to figure out targets, which is to ask what's distinctive about this context. And the sketch portrayed a dinner party, a social occasion, I'm told by people who do this, which guests eat together at someone's home. I don't have time to work through the detailed translation device that we've got, but we can probably all agree here that a dinner party has unspoken codes of conduct, and that they're different to gatherings of friends in other cultures or contexts. This sketch is of a bourgeois, metropolitan, Western, particularly American kind of gathering. So its target content and purpose is different to other social contexts. For example, its content must appear to be spontaneous and not serious. It's like small talk. And its purpose is about maintaining connections among urban professionals and not, say, making business deals. There's lots more I could add, but my simple points are every social context has targets, distinctive contents, distinctive purposes, so we can analyse how the actions unfold using autonomy codes. What happened here? Well, you know nothing, Jon Snow, about dinner parties. It starts with the host and guest talking about the weather. This small talk is deep inside their target content and purpose, a sovereign code, but then Jon Snow says, winter is coming. And his seriousness makes this non-target content with the position autonomy, and it's an ominous warning. He's not, like making small talk or socializing. It's weak relational autonomy, so it's an exotic code. And so the sketch basically sets up an autonomy code clash. And that happens several times more. For example, the host resets the discussion to light conversation about wine and guest's mum and Napa. John interjects, "I'll never knew him, mother of a bastard." Describes his father. As you heard, a guest asks whether he keeps in touch with his father, and he says, "Oh, his head was chopped off." We've got a repeated code clash. At this point, they cut to the hallway, where the host tells John he's using non-target content. None of that is small talk. And he makes it clear what kind of thing is small talk, such as, "Do you have any siblings?" So this discussion is about target content, but it's not itself target content. It's not small talk itself. It's weaker positional autonomy. But it's aimed at the target purpose of making friends. It's for stronger relational autonomy. So in other words, it's an introjected code. Like the teacher's giving directions. Like our first teacher, the host is making the content, the target content clear, rather than doing what the second teacher would have done, which is saying anything will do while secretly having a clear idea of what's really appropriate. And so it goes on until John apologises to everyone, saying work has been very stressful, and then after prompting, acts out the story of Game of Thrones up until the point that this was created anyway, which the other guests love. And at this point, what was non-target content is being turned to target purpose, that of entertaining. So throughout, basically, the host and the guests remain deep inside their sovereign code, the other guests. Jon Snow's ominous warnings create a code clash, but after the host makes clear he's missing the target, he apologises, but he doesn't match that. Instead, he turns his non-target content to target purpose, a purpose he makes clear he shares when he says in the hallway that he wants to make friends and is trying to make small talk. And finally, as he tells his story, it becomes part of a new shared sovereign code, both transforming his content from ominous to entertaining and transforming their idea of what can be discussed. And of course, the audience laughter comes from code clashes and code shifts, first from how incongruent Jon Snow is in this environment, and then later from how he's integrated games of thrown content into the dinner party. Now let's be clear again. I'm not saying newcomers have to turn themselves into entertainment for others. This is not an allegory of assimilation. My point is to highlight how here, like our first teacher, the target content and the purpose are both made explicit. John and the host make that explicit in the hallway. But it doesn't mean you have to reproduce that. In this case, John doesn't. He turns to purpose his non-target content and transforms everyone's idea of what the target content could be. And my point really is to show that autonomy codes can help us make clear the rules of the game and how those rules can be changed. And to show that we can do that for everywhere, not just academic knowledge, not just classrooms. And of course, my other hidden reason is because, to use it before it goes out of date. So what can we take from all this? First, as our classroom examples showed, making explicit the rules of the game is crucial. The first teacher made her target content and purpose clear, sets up her students to succeed in her unit. Second teacher kept them in the dark, kept the target content to himself, and they struggled. More widely in education, if your targets are not explicit, only those who already know them will succeed. In other words, only students with privileged backgrounds who already know the rules of the game. And that's not just about academic knowledge or education. Whatever your target content or purpose, make them explicit, make them learnable. Keeping them hidden not only disadvantages those who cannot already see them, but it means they're harder to challenge. Because if you don't know the rules of the game, it's not just hard to win, it's also hard to change those rules, to change the game. My second point is that LCT practices what it preaches by offering tools that make explicit the rules of the game. We often talk about how LCT overcomes knowledge blindness by making explicit knowledge as an object of study, but it also makes explicit what people do with knowledge practices. In this case, good teaching practice, so that we can teach other teachers how to do that. But more importantly, we make explicit the principles underlying that practice. We don't just describe what happens, we excavate beneath the surface to see what's generating what happens. In other words, we make explicit that which is otherwise hidden, the legitimation codes. And that's crucial for empowering others, because we don't say, do this particular practice, which is something you hear from those trapped in the universalizing mindset of the big dichotomy. Instead, we propose principles or codes, such as things like autonomy tours and semantic waves, and we say that those will look different in the practice in your specific context. In your specific context, it will look different depending upon your targets and what they are. So while the principles we come up with may be widely applicable, the practices are always contextual. As I said, my classroom examples were not an argument for science, they weren't an argument for disciplinarity, The targets for those teachers involve the science syllabus, but other people in other contexts have different targets. They could involve making friends at a dinner party like John said, or they could be wanting to get a job in an interview or something else. LCT doesn't tell you what your target should be. It shows you which codes, profiles and pathways might help you reach your targets. And this is already illustrating my third point, which is that LCT defies the big dichotomies. I've been saying it defies the universalizing mindset that has one solution for everything. Ideas like autonomy, tools and semantic waves don't valorize one form of knowledge over another. For example, we don't think that academic knowledge is sacred and everyday knowledge is profane. That either-or thinking is to believe that one code or one set of codes will solve everything. Instead, the answer often involves negotiating many codes, moving around the plane, being able to take different pathways when you need to. In the rest of her lessons, that first teacher didn't just keep making return trips up and down, up and down. She used all sorts of different other pathways. And we discussed, she's the teacher that's in the Autonomy Tours paper, where she's doing different pathways. And these pathways and profiles show that dichotomous types like academic knowledge and everyday knowledge don't actually match the complexity of reality. A simple example from those classrooms is that academic knowledge involves pedagogic directions and educational content. They're different forms of knowledge. And in the comedy sketch, personal experience, it wasn't the same. In fact, they clashed. So again, LCT is about getting beneath the surface to the underlying principles, the codes, to reveal that it's not about simplistic dichotomous types. And in so doing, we don't fall into that other position of saying, oh, it's just complex, that kind of nihilism. We do offer ideas such as semantic waves and autonomy tools, or in this case, what I'm saying, which is make your targets explicit. And that brings me to my final point. Isn't it all really obvious? Wasn't that just a lot of analysis for little gain? For example, that first teacher, isn't that what any good teacher does? Yes, making clear your target content and your target purpose, making explicit the rules of your game is something that good teachers do. Sometimes. But it's not obvious. Most teachers I've studied don't do it. They don't know they're not doing it. And even when they're doing it, they don't know that they are doing it or why they're doing it. And in interviews, it was clear that the second teacher really believed he was making the rules of the game explicit for his students. So I don't think it is as obvious as you might seem. And to return to where I began, that's one reason why LCT is complex and technical, why it involves finely drawn distinctions and careful methods. The solutions to our problems don't lie to hand, or they'd not be problems. The solutions are not easy to find. They often lie beneath the surface, beneath appearances. They have to be excavated, even if they seem obvious once they're made visible. So yes, make your targets explicit is obvious. Semantic waves are obvious. Autonomy tools are obvious once you've seen them. But previously they were hidden. That brings me to the cat flap. This is from Doug Checklist's Holistic Detective Agency by Douglas Adams, in which a character says, Sir Isaac Newton, renowned inventor of the cat flap, and he says, the what? The cat flap, a device of the utmost cunning, an invention, it's a door within a door, you see. He says, yes, but there's also the small matter of Newton discovering gravity. It's all gravity, well, there's that, I suppose, that was merely a discovery. Someone was bound to notice sooner or later. But the cat flap, that's very dramatic. I would have thought it was quite obvious, he says. Anyone could have thought it. Ah, it's a rare mind indeed that can render the hitherto non-existent blindingly obvious. So yes, our ideas are obvious once you can see them, like the cat flap. Or in the same way that the building blocks of a great building are obvious once they've been excavated, carved, and laid. I grew up in, I promise I'm finishing, I grew up in council housing, with public housing, and it gave us shelter, and it was cheap, and compared to other options, it was a castle. But it wasn't meant to last. It was cheaply built, and they fell apart pretty quickly. When I was older, and I got to go overseas and things like that, I saw the Cathedral of Pisa in Italy, and heard a guide say that it was begun by an architect who died before it was finished, and the next architect also died, and it was only completed much later. And it was laid stone by many, many people. And those stones weren't just lying around. They had to be excavated, they had to be carved, and they had to be laid properly. I'm not saying we have to build cathedrals. I'm saying that to build something that doesn't just fall apart often requires excavating beneath the surface to reveal what's hidden, and making that explicit and carefully putting that together, and that requires tools that are robust and precise. So LCT concepts may take time and effort to learn, and they may sound technical and difficult. Or as Shinra Achebe wrote, writers don't give prescription, they give headaches. LCT may give you headaches, but it also gives you a new way of seeing. And all new ways of seeing are difficult, and that takes effort to learn. And these tools do now allow you to see something new. They do give you a new way of seeing, and they allow us to empower others to see something new. And that's a real voyage of discovery. As you'll hear this week in great papers on all kinds of issues, using all kinds of methods and all kinds of data, each one making explicit a little more of what was hidden, each showing a little more of the rules of the game of what that we call social life. And to me, that makes it worthwhile being a benevolent misfit. It's why what we do matters. Thank you.